Have you ever wondered why some older men choose solitude over love? It's not because they've given up on life, but because they've learned something deeper, something most of us don't fully understand. Richard, 62, is one of those men. After a failed marriage and several short-lived relationships, he made a choice that many would consider strange. He decided to live alone. But here's the truth that most people miss. He's not lonely, and he's not bitter. He's simply found peace in solitude, a peace that's worth more to him than any fleeting romance. You see, after decades of emotional ups and downs, of giving and losing, Richard reached a point where he realized that love, as we know it, often comes with strings attached, and he wasn't willing to pay that price anymore. For years, he's watched relationships transform into transactions, where love is conditional and affection is based on performance. After everything, he decided that the value of peace, freedom, and loyalty outweighed the chaos that comes with being involved in someone else's emotional roller coaster. Richard's decision isn't about bitterness or fear. It's about wisdom gained from years of experience. He doesn't want to be seen as a man who's given up. He wants to be seen as a man who chose something more valuable: the quiet, unwavering loyalty of a dog, the stability of living life on his own terms, and the absence of the emotional baggage that so many relationships bring. Richard's decision to live alone wasn't sudden, and it certainly wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a choice that came after years of observing the cost of relationships. Each time he had invested in someone, he gave pieces of himself away: his time, his energy, his trust. And what did he get in return? Emotional roller coasters, unmet expectations, and the painful realization that love often has strings attached. His first marriage ended after years of fighting to keep it together, only for the final betrayal to leave him exhausted. The second was a brief spark, but it quickly faded, and once again, he found himself carrying the weight of someone else's emotional turmoil. After that, Richard became more cautious, more observant. He began to see patterns: the same fights, the same disappointments, the same empty promises. At some point, he realized that he wasn't losing love. He was gaining freedom, a life free of the emotional baggage that had weighed him down for so long. And that freedom, he realized, was more valuable than any fleeting connection. His dog, Max, was the only constant in his life, offering him something the relationships couldn't: unconditional loyalty. Richard could go to sleep each night knowing that Max would be there in the morning, tail wagging, eyes full of love, without asking for anything in return. This wasn't loneliness, it was peace. And for Richard, peace was priceless. As the years passed, Richard's perspective on relationships shifted even further. He began to realize that most of what society told him about love and companionship was just noise designed to make people feel incomplete without someone else. He no longer believed in the fairy tale of finding the perfect partner or the idea that love was the ultimate goal. His priorities had changed, and with that change, his definition of happiness had evolved. Richard had learned to value peace over passion. The whirlwind romances of his youth now seemed chaotic and draining. They were full of excitement, yes, but they came at a price: emotional exhaustion, stress, and the constant fear of what might come next. Now, he cherished the simple things: waking up to the quiet of his home, having breakfast without interruptions, going on walks with Max, and having a sense of stability that he never had before. The freedom to make decisions without needing approval, the ability to spend his time however he wanted, without the burden of someone else's expectations. These were the things Richard valued now. He had discovered that solitude didn't mean loneliness. It meant freedom, clarity, and a chance to reflect on the life he had lived. He could finally breathe without the weight of past relationships holding him back. And with every passing day, he grew more convinced that this was the life he had been searching for all along. Richard's new reality was peaceful, but it wasn't without its challenges. As he embraced the solitude he had carefully chosen, there were moments when society's expectations crept in. Friends would ask if he was dating, or if he was ever going to get remarried. They didn't understand why he seemed content being single. To them, his decision to stay alone was a mystery. But Richard didn't feel the need to explain himself anymore. He had spent years trying to live up to other people's standards of happiness, and he had come to realize that happiness wasn't about following a script. It was about understanding what brought him peace. For Richard, that peace didn't come from romantic love or the company of others. It came from knowing who he was and being comfortable with his own company. He spent more time in nature, walking trails, breathing in the fresh air, and enjoying the moments of quiet that were now his. Max, his dog, was always by his side, a loyal companion who didn't ask for more than a walk and a treat. Richard had learned that his life didn't need to be filled with endless activities or new relationships to be meaningful. The stillness, the simplicity of his daily routine, gave him more joy than any past relationship had ever done. The truth was, he had finally found the peace he had always been searching for, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. As time went on, Richard started to notice something within himself. He had changed, and for the better. He wasn't the man who once sought validation from others or chased after fleeting connections. The years of painful relationships had chipped away at that need, and now, he had discovered something far more valuable: self-respect. He no longer felt the pressure to conform to society's idea of success or happiness. His life was rich with meaning, not because of what he had achieved through relationships or material possessions, but because of the personal growth he had achieved by simply being true to himself. Richard began to realize that his journey wasn't about isolating himself from the world, but about choosing who to let into his life. The people who mattered most to him were the ones who respected his boundaries, understood his choices, and didn't judge him for his decision to live alone. He also found himself becoming more compassionate, not out of obligation, but because he understood what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. With Max by his side, Richard learned that the love he had once sought from others was already right there, unconditional and simple. It wasn't the romantic love he had once dreamed of, but a love that filled his days with purpose and joy. For Richard, this was more than enough. And as he walked through life, he found himself truly content, not because he had found someone else, but because he had finally found peace within himself. Richard's life continued to unfold in a way he hadn't expected. The initial relief of living alone soon became a deeper, more fulfilling experience than he could have imagined. It wasn't just about escaping the chaos of past relationships. It was about reclaiming his own narrative. As the years passed, he started noticing how much more he appreciated the simple moments. Walking through the neighborhood park, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot, the sunlight streaming through the trees, it all felt like a gift. He would pause, take a deep breath, and smile, knowing that he had learned to appreciate things he had once taken for granted. One evening, as he sat on his porch with Max by his side, Richard realized that he wasn't just living, he was thriving. He had created a life that was entirely his own. He had found peace in the silence and joy in the routine. And when he thought about relationships, he no longer felt sadness or regret. Instead, he felt gratitude for the lessons they had taught him. He had learned that love doesn't always come in the form of a romantic partner, and that sometimes the most meaningful connections are the ones we make with ourselves. Richard knew he had made the right decision all those years ago. He had chosen to live life on his own terms, and in doing so, he had found something far more precious than love, a deep, unshakable peace within himself. Richard's life had settled into a rhythm he had never imagined would bring him so much fulfillment. His mornings began with the quiet chirping of birds outside his window, and Max's soft paws tapping across the floor, eager for their daily walk. It was during these walks that Richard found the most peace, just him, Max, and the open air. He had created a life that allowed him to reconnect with nature, with himself, and most importantly, with the simple joys he had overlooked in his younger years. As he strolled along the familiar path through the park, he often found himself reflecting on how far he had come. He thought about the man he used to be, the man who sought validation, who believed that love and companionship were the keys to happiness. Now, Richard understood that happiness came from within. It was in the quiet moments of solitude, in the ability to make decisions based on his own desires, and in the joy of knowing he was no longer chasing something outside of himself. Richard's decision to live alone, to live without the weight of expectations, had allowed him to discover a sense of peace that he had never known. He had stopped looking for answers from others, and instead, had learned to trust his own instincts. With Max by his side, Richard had found not just a companion, but a way of life that was authentic and fulfilling in a way he never thought possible. Richard had come to realize that the life he had built for himself was a reflection of his growth and understanding. Each decision he made, each action he took, was a conscious choice to honor himself and his peace. He no longer felt the need to explain his choices to others, to justify why he preferred solitude over companionship. His friends, who had once questioned his decision, now respected it. They could see the calmness in his eyes, the contentment in his movements. Richard wasn't living a life of withdrawal. He was living a life of intention. What others might have seen as loneliness, he saw as freedom. The simple routines of his days, walking with Max, tending to his small garden, enjoying a quiet meal, had become his new normal, and it was a normal that he cherished deeply. He no longer yearned for the chaos of past relationships, the emotional highs and lows, or the pressure to meet someone else's expectations. Instead, he found joy in the small things. The way Max's tail wagged when Richard returned home, the feeling of sunlight on his face, and the satisfaction of knowing that his life was now filled with what truly mattered. Richard had discovered the freedom of living without apology, without needing validation from anyone else. He had learned that happiness wasn't found in another person, it was found in himself. And for the first time in his life, Richard felt completely at peace. Richard's life had evolved into something he could never have imagined when he was younger. The man who once sought approval, who once believed that love was the ultimate goal, now understood that peace and self-respect were far more important. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had found a life that was his own, free from expectations, full of quiet contentment. It wasn't that he had abandoned the idea of love. It was that he had redefined what love meant. Love, he now knew, wasn't something you search for outside of yourself. It was something you cultivate within. And Richard had cultivated it in abundance for himself. The connection he had with Max, the dog who had been his companion through it all, had become more meaningful than any relationship he had ever been in. Max's loyalty was simple, pure, and constant, something Richard had longed for in human relationships but had never truly found. Richard's bond with Max was a reminder that loyalty and companionship didn't require complexity. As he sat in his favorite chair one evening, with the warmth of the setting sun spilling through the windows and Max resting peacefully at his feet, Richard realized that he had finally found what he had been looking for all along. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a life that he had created for himself. And for Richard, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.